Okay, today we're going to talk about residential wiring lab number 7. I encourage you to, you know, pull it up and look at it and try to draw it on your own before you watch the video, right? Because I'm going to walk through, what needs to be wired to what. But by this point in the class, you should be able to look at a schematic and make that plan on your own. And so if you're not able to do that yet, you need to practice that before you uh, you know watch the video of how I'm going to do it. And then once if you struggle, then watch the video. But that is something that you need to begin practicing. You need to have already been practicing that. Uh, you know, draw it, sketch it out. As an apprentice, there were many times when I'd get to a room and it had a somewhat complicated layout, and I'd have to sketch out what goes where, what's going to get attached where, and until you get comfortable, then that may be something that you need to do. Okay, so this is this week's lab. We have a home run coming into a receptacle. We have a second receptacle that's going to need to get its power from that home run. We have a couple of lights, and they're going to need to be powered. That we have the single home run, so that home run is going to need to come up to one of these switch boxes to get us power up to the lights. And so when I'm looking at how am I going to route the cables, I'm looking at um, well, where do I need to get power to? Right? If my home run comes in to this box, I know I need to get power over to this receptacle. I know I'm going to need to get power up to one of the switch boxes. It makes sense to bring it up to this first switch box. One, because it's the one that's closest to my home run, and two, because there are two separate switches there, and those two separate switches are both going to require power. So if I look over here at my instructions that I was given, right, my single pole switch is going to control the light on the left. My three-way, four-way switches are going to control the switch on the right. It gives me the height that I need to mount those switches at. I will be checking this. This gives me the height that I'm mounting my receptacles. It also tells me that everything is half-inch sheetrock, and so that's going to be the depth of that box, how far that box needs to stick out, so that the sheetrock can be installed later. So this tells me I've got a single pole switch controlling the switch on the light on the left. So that's going to be a wire up to there. I'm going to need a wire in between my switches, because my 3 and 4-way switches are all connected together. And then we're going to come up to this other light. And then each of those is going to be, if I have my home run. My home run is going to be a 14-2, which is going to be a black and a white wire in that cable. All that I need over at the other receptacle is power and a neutral, so that's all that we're bringing there. Coming into my switch box, all that I need bringing into my switch box is a power and a neutral, so that's going to be a 14-2 cable. My switch up to my single pole switch up to the light, that will be a 14-2 cable as well. Now, between my three-way switches, I do have to get a neutral all the way. I get a neutral all the way up to this light right here, and so I'm going to have to carry that neutral through these boxes, and then I'm going to need a red wire and a black wire as my travelers. So for each of those, I'm going to need a 14-3, a red wire, a black wire, and a white wire, and then we will only need for that last little leg from the last switch up to the light, it'll be a 14-2. So what is this going to look like, in our when we're actually wiring this in? Well, we're going to have our home run is going to come in. It's going to come up and be split off, right? We're going to use a jumper here to jump to my receptacle. It's going to leave the box to go towards the other receptacle, and it's also going to leave the box to move towards my switches, my switch box up here. right? I'm going to use blue for the neutral wire, right? My home run. This is my home run coming in. Draw me an arrow to represent that that is the home run. It is going to get tied in with a pigtail as well. We're going to jump off to our receptacle, and then we also have a wire that is continuing on to this receptacle. This is continuing on to this receptacle. I did notice last week we had a couple of folks that swapped these, right? The side of the receptacle that you hook your black wire to is the short slot, right? It is not, when you're looking at that receptacle, left or right, because it depends on which way this receptacle is flipped. If this receptacle is flipped this way or flipped the other way, the code book doesn't care which way we flip that, as long as all of them are consistent. But the hot wire has to be tied to the hot side, which is the short slot, and the neutral wire has to be tied to the neutral side, which is the longer slot. So we want to make sure that we are taking care of that. All right, so we've got our first box and our second box are done. Other than hooking up our grounds, right? I haven't been showing the grounds here because they tend to clutter up these pictures here, but this would get tied in to the ground, and it would get tied in to the ground. I'm gonna take that back out just to keep the clutter down so that you guys can see. But our ground runs along in these boxes, and it gets attached to everything. All devices are getting tied in to that ground. All right, so now then we have our first two boxes done. We're gonna move up to our switch box here. Try this in black and not in green. I'm gonna move up into this switch box. Once again, we're going to come off of this with a couple of pigtails, right? Because I have to power both switches. So my power in, it is going to both switches. That is all that it is going to tie to, is those two switches. It ties to one side of the single pole switch. Doesn't matter which screw, but it needs to tie to one of the screws of the single pole switch. On the three-way switch, it is going to tie to the black screw that is by itself. And when I say it's by itself, I don't mean it's the one that's over on one side by itself. It is, if I draw a line through that switch horizontally, the one that is on the bottom half, or it may be on the top half, depending on which way you've got it flipped, but the one that is alone there is the common screw. That is the screw that power is going to come in on, or that power is going to leave on. The other two, the two that if I took my hand and I pinched that switch, I held that switch with only two fingers. If I held that switch with two fingers, and I put my fingers on two sets of screws, the two screws that they're on is going to be the common screws that are providing power to the next switch in the series. All right, so that takes care of our hot wire coming in. We're also going to have tied in to this wire nut here. We're going to have a neutral wire in this box. It is just going to get tied onto it's just going to get tied on and moved to the next receptacle, right, or the next switch. We're not using it at all. It's just getting passed along. It's just we got to get a neutral to our lights. Then I'm going to add we have to have our first light is going to get a hot wire up to it, and is also we're actually going to tie 3 wires into that switch, because we're going to come up to our first light. Okay, so that gets us, we now have our first light is now controlled by this switch. Now we need to get power to our second light. Well, That's going to require us to come across here with a traveler. It's going to go to a traveler screw. We're going to have a red wire here. That red wire is going to come across to a traveler. Our blue wire here is just getting tied together with a wire nut there and moving on to our next switch box location, leaving our four-way switch here in the middle. We're going to leave on two travelers a black wire, which is going to come up and hook to here, and a red wire, which is going to come up. We'll come around and tie it to right here. And then all we've got left, we've got just a couple connections left to make. I'm going to hook my neutral up and come up to this light, and I'm going to come off of the common screw, the one that's painted black. I'm going to come up to that last light. Put my wire nut on my blue wire there, put my wire nut on my blue wire, my white wire, my neutral wire. So that's the route that we're going to take, right? We come into this box, we have a home run coming in, have two runs leaving. May ask you to check the box fill on that box. Is that box going to hold all of those wires? Right? May ask you to do the box fill calculation on your sheet before you turn it in. Right? You remember how to do box fill? You're going to need to know that for your final next week. So we want to be sure we're still maintaining the skills that we have learned, and we're just adding to those. So if you have any questions, you can send me an email, see me in class. We'll look into that.